Hello, I'm Locke Meredith, and I'd like to invite you to join me on the next Legal Lines, where our guest is our United States Congressman Bill Cassidy. He's a doctor, and he's going to talk to us about the challenges in the United States Congress, the national debt. He's going to talk to us about the budgeting process, and of course, of great interest is the oil rig spill in the Gulf of Mexico. So join us on the next Legal Lines with our United States Congressman Bill Cassidy.
Want to learn the secret to big savings on TV, internet, and phone? It's bundling your services with Cox. When you bundle with Cox, you get digital cable, high-speed internet with Power Boost, and telephone, all for one low monthly price. That's 3 fantastic services at one low price that will make you smile. The secret is out. The more you bundle, the more you save. So get a whole lot and save a whole lot when you bundle with Cox.
Hello, I'm Locke Meredith, and I'm very pleased to have on the show today our United States Congressman Bill Cassidy. Bill.
Hey, Locke.
Thanks for being on the show again. It's been almost a year, and actually probably a little over a year, and I can't believe it.
Thank you for having me.
Tell the folks kind of what you've been up to. I know it's been a busy, busy time.
This has been my first term in Congress. It's been a great first term. I ran because I was upset about how our government was spending money. I hate to say it, our government has spent even more, but now because of the people, the discussion is focused away from spending more to spending less.
Which is a big shift.
Big shift, and that's because of the people, which has been really neat to see. We've talked about health care, which means a heck of a lot to me, and lastly the oil spill, which is so important to our state. And so it's been a privilege to be in the middle of that discussion, trying to, again, shape the conversation in a way which is good for the working people of Louisiana.
And you're our congressman for District 6, which encompasses, what, about 8 parishes?
I think it's 10?
10 parishes.
We have East Baton Rouge, and some or all of every parish that touches it. Yes.
Which is over 700,000 people.
Yes.
So you're representing 700,000 people when you're up there in the House of Representatives.
And that is a challenge.
No, it is. And last time we talked, the bottom line is that the Democrats had a supermajority, meaning that they had control of the House and didn't need any Republicans to help them pass anything. And in the Senate, they had 60 votes and didn't need any Republican senators to help them pass anything.
Correct.
That changed when Senator Scott Brown was elected. How has it changed the dynamics of the communications between the Democrats and the Republicans? There
are significant philosophical differences between the two. And so one, Scott Brown getting elected forced the conversation to come a little bit back towards the center, because at least on the Senate side, they needed some Republican support to get things through. But at least when it comes to things such as the oil spill, there are folks in the left wing of the Democratic Party that want no drilling anywhere off the coast of any state. There are others that think we can do that and still import less from OPEC nations, which you're not quite sure from Louisiana how that would happen. And that is the argument currently prevailing in the House. I think the American people are far more towards the center than that. And
which is what position?
The position would be that we want responsible, safe drilling in the United States, an exploring of our own natural resources with the jobs that creates, and import less from OPEC nations as we enhance our own production.
Let's go ahead and talk about the Deepwater Horizon spill and disaster and catastrophe. You've been pretty much involved in that because it's falling in the state of Louisiana and its waterways. Tell the folks what's going on.
Well, there's several committees that had jurisdiction. The primary committee is Natural Resources, and I'm fortunate enough to be on that committee. And as the scientists said, the president asked scientists to do an initial review of what happened, and they said that there were identifiable causes.
Meaning what?
It means that you can look at the way that pipe was set and see that BP cut corners as to how the pipe was set.
In fact, I think I read, Bill, when preparing for the show on your information, that the number of braces used to construct it was 6 instead of 21, which other folks like Exxon, et cetera, would have used.
Yes, so if the drill well is right exactly in the middle, the concrete from the bottom or the cement from the bottom is better able to seal it. If the centering is off, if you will, if it's not centered, then the cementing is not effective. It appears that the well may have been to the side, the cementing was not effective, and so when the oil and gas began to flow from the depths to the surface, it was because that cementing job was faulty. That was identifiable. You could see how to prevent that in the future. The scientists that the president commissioned said we don't need to have a blanket moratorium. Those things can be corrected now.
And that is a big issue for our state, and that is the issue of the moratorium. Explain to the folks what's going on in that regard.
Yes. Right now,
Then when we say moratorium, tell them what that means.
the president has said that there shall not be any more outer continental shelf drilling until further notice. They've sent a signal that will be November the 30th, but they can keep it longer or they can shorten it.
And in fact, a lawsuit was filed by some of the energy producers, and the trial court ruled that moratorium was not appropriate.
Yes.
And then the administration, as I understand it, appealed it, tried to get that stay, but the appellate court didn't agree. But the bottom line is nobody's going to go be spending millions of dollars until they know they're okay.
Judge Feldman in New Orleans said, listen, federal government, President Obama, Secretary Salazar, you have not made your case. I side with the working people of Louisiana. It seems as if the benefits from your moratorium are far outweighed by the economic hardship it's causing upon the people of Louisiana.
And the bottom line is, in your opinion, that's appropriate because already we know that they did not construct this well properly in the way a lot of the other energy producers would have.
Correct, and we know that because, again, the president's own scientists from the National Academy of Engineering gave that opinion. And they are the ones that said there should not be a blanket moratorium. Rather, you should go and inspect and make sure that the ones that are out there are doing it properly, but if they are, it can be done safely.
And the reason this is such a big deal for Louisiana is I was reading that one energy job creates, with all the other service energy jobs, 5.5 more jobs.
And these are well-paying jobs. As you and I know, folks will work 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off. They'll go out to the rig for 2 weeks, they'll return, stay at home for 2 weeks. And in those 2 weeks off, 2 weeks on the rig throughout the year, they'll earn enough money to send their kids to parochial school if they wish, buy 2 cars, have a house note, take care of their family. If all of a sudden you shut down those jobs, then that's a house mortgage, that's tuition, those are car notes that cannot be met. Now, the president has set up a relief fund, if you will.
That's the $20 billion?
No, this is $100 million.
Okay.
The $20 billion doesn't apply because Mr. Feinberg, the attorney who's been put there, said that the moratorium has nothing to do with the oil spill.
So he's not paying any moratorium
No.
costs out of that $20 billion?
Now, there's $100 million to compensate for lost wages, but it's estimated there'll be $700 million of lost wages, and the $100 million does not help the caterers or the grocery stores or anyone else that provides services to those folks offshore.
Interesting. So what is taking place in the federal government to deal with this spill now? Because you hear everybody say, well, it looks like it's cleaned up, and then stories came out yesterday that 80% of the oil is still in the Gulf. What is your understanding of the facts?
Clearly we need to get more understanding of the facts. And so one misconception people have is that the oil is just like oil. But instead, the oil is mixed in with the water in parts per million. That can still have an impact.
Sure.
But what we in Louisiana need to know is certainty as to how much oil is out there, if it's affecting our seafood, which right now indications are that it's not, and what can we do to prevent this disaster from occurring in the future.
All right. And so what are your thoughts regarding the $20 billion fund set aside being administered by Mr. Fine?
Feinberg is going to do a good job. We met with him, several congressmen and women met with him in D.C. He's going to take a broad understanding of the impact of this. If, for example, a realtor was about to close a deal on someone that was buying a home, and a home had to be here because of their involvement with, say, OCS drilling, and now they're not going to buy the home, he will compensate the realtor. And so I think he's going to take a broad understanding of that. That will be good for our state.
All right, let's also talk about the CLEAR Act on the next segment. This is Locke Meredith with our United States Congressman Bill Cassidy. We'll be right back.
Everybody loves on demand from Cox. Well, did you know the love's about to grow? Soon, your on-demand menu will have a whole new look, making it easier than ever to find your favorite shows, access hundreds of movies, and thousands of free programming choices, even HD. Just like that, so you can watch what you want to watch, when you want to watch it. It just keeps growing better every day. See what's coming on demand and get more out of what you're into with Cox Digital Cable.
Welcome back to Legal Lines. I'm Locke Meredith, and again, very pleased to have on the show Bill Cassidy. He is our United States Congressman for District 6. Bill, we were talking about the spill in the Gulf, and I know that there's been some legislation that's passed the House. It's being contemplated by the Senate of the federal government. Explain to the folks what it is. I think it's called CLEAR is the acronym.
Well, of course, Congress wants to respond to the disaster. Now, a CLEAR Act originally was introduced about 2 years ago. Had nothing to do with the disaster.
So prior to the spill?
Prior to the spill.
Okay.
Technically in September of '09, I think. And it was resurrected, if you will, ostensibly to address the spill, but in reality as a vehicle for some other things. One of the things it does that will be of concern to we in Louisiana is it creates unlimited liability for anyone who's drilling out in the Gulf. Now, President Obama opposes this.
Okay.
Many Democrats oppose this, but nonetheless it passed because, frankly, people want to punish BP.
Now, when you say unlimited liability, what do you mean?
It means that if you are a mid-major, just a note of explanation, there's 5 companies out there, ExxonMobil, Chevron, Shell, BP, ConocoPhillips, I guess, although I'm not sure they're offshore. They have huge holdings. And they can do, each of those companies can do what BP can do right now, which is keep on writing checks until everything is made whole. There's other companies which employ about 300,000 people in the aggregate and get about 90% of the leases in the Gulf of Mexico.
These are what are referred to as the independent producers?
Independent producers.
And they're actually providing, what I read was 50% of the jobs.
I've read higher than that, but let's just say it's 50%. 300,000 people are directly employed or indirectly employed by these mid-majors. They will go where the big companies won't go until the big companies see that these companies are making a profit.
Interesting.
So it's really important to our economy. The way that they've addressed it in the past is that there is a fee on every barrel of oil produced that goes to an oil spill trust fund.
Okay.
So if a smaller company has an incident, they would first have a legal liability. If there's criminal charges, that liability can be much greater than the $75 million. But if they're doing everything right, but nonetheless there's a spill, they have a $75 million cap, and then it kicks over to the oil trust fund.
And is there any limit to access the monies in that trust fund?
No, there's not. Well, there technically is not by law, Locke. But what happens is that there's so much deficit spending.
Interesting.
That trust fund, even though it's not a tax on the people, and even though it doesn't go to the deficit, in the accounting, it makes the deficit spending worse. So there's a reluctance to spend that trust fund, not because it couldn't be used to allow the independents to continue to drill and cover what they could not cover, but because it offsets deficit spending elsewhere in the budget.
Looks good publicly and in politics.
And it hurts Louisiana, but theoretically it benefits the rest of the country. And so they are sacrificing Louisiana's interest, the jobs that these independents produce, in order to make it look better for the rest of the country. The CLEAR Act ultimately was a cynical exploitation of the tragedy for the benefit of interest elsewhere.
Now, you're not saying that you would not want folks who are injured to be fully compensated their injuries. You're saying the system as it exists can accomplish that.
The system, certainly the system as it exists and as it has since been tweaked since the tragedy, can accomplish that.
Okay.
Now, I promise you, there are still some things we can do further.
Sure.
But in terms of big scale, for example, one thing that this bill did, it puts a $2 fee on every barrel of oil produced on federal waters. Now, that $2 fee doesn't go to rebuild the coastline. It goes to buy parkland across the United States.
So it has nothing to do with the oil industry at all?
Nothing to do with the oil industry, except insofar as they make domestically produced oil cost more. It makes foreign oil relatively cheaper. And so, if you will, it shifts jobs from domestic production to buying foreign oil.
And that's a national security interest concern of great weight.
Yes.
Explain to the folks why.
If we buy more oil, say we decrease production in the Gulf of Mexico by 20%, the people that we make that up from are typically OPEC nations. Think Venezuela. Now, if we buy more oil from Venezuela, one, their environmental protection is not as good as we. Two, they're not employing Americans. But three, we're putting money in the pocket of Hugo Chavez.
Who don't like us.
Who doesn't like us and uses that to, wherever he can, attempt to confront our interest in a negative way.
Well, and frankly, the same thing over in the Middle East.
In many of the countries in the Middle East.
The money is going to folks who, for whatever reason, do not support America and its people and its interests. And as I understand it, that you said these independent producers would have 90% of the lease, they employ at least 50% of the folks, and so what we're doing is raising taxes on those guys, running them out of business, and thus shipping jobs overseas and requiring imports from overseas and reducing our ability to produce our own oil for our own needs.
Correct. Department of Defense put out a white paper a year or so ago in which they basically recommended we become less dependent upon countries in the Middle East. By having this outer continental shelf drilling moratorium, we're becoming more dependent upon those countries.
And in fact, I read that one of the rigs, and there are a very limited number of rigs that can do these operations, has already headed to Africa.
Yes, 2 or 3 of the rigs have already moved. The rigs rent for $500,000 a day. So the question is, if the moratorium is going to stretch on for 6 months or more, do you keep a rig here paying $500,000 a day for it to sit, maybe to be maintained, but at some point you've done all that? Or do you say, well, we're just going to cash it in and take it to the coast of Brazil?
And so the great concern is, kind of to summarize, is that let's say there's a war in the Middle East, and that's a distinct possibility, and oil production is interrupted, or somebody over there doesn't like us and says we're not sending you any more oil. Do we have the capacity to produce that oil for ourselves?
We don't have the capacity to do it entirely. And the degree that we shut down OCS drilling, we decrease our capacity to do it at all. I think 30% of our domestic oil, domestically produced oil in the United States, comes from the OCS drilling off the Gulf of Mexico, and 20% of our natural gas.
Wow.
So 30% oil, 20% natural gas will be gone. Now you can say the ones that are already producing will continue to produce, but ultimately those will need to be replenished, and that's what we're talking about.
All right, let's shift gears. Let's talk about the economy, because this all kind of folds together. We are so much in debt, it's unbelievable, and it's truly affecting the economy. Tell the folks kind of where we are.
Yeah, the American people, I think, understand this better than the folks in Washington, D.C. do sometimes. We have more debt than we've ever had in the history of our country.
Which is how much?
Well, I think there's $14 trillion.
With a T, as we were discussing
With a T.
earlier.
I've never used T as an abbreviation in my life, but now we have $14 trillion. I hear estimates of anywhere from $32,000 to $40,000 for every man, woman, and child.
Meaning every United States citizen, a one-day-old baby to a 99-year-old person, the government has gone out and charged on our credit card that we have to pay back $30,000 to $40,000.
Absolutely. Now that begins to hurt the economy. The more government borrows, the less there is for private business to borrow. If private business can't borrow, they can't expand business and hire more workers.
All right, let's continue this discussion on the next segment. This is Locke Meredith with our United States Congressman Bill Cassidy. We'll be right back.
It's free. That's right. Cox gives you a ton of HD channels for no additional cost. Your favorite HD channels, your local channels in HD, and even more HD choices with On Demand. And more are being added every day. So get a whole lot more HD for a whole lot less with Cox Digital Cable.
Welcome back to Legal Lines. I'm Locke Meredith, and again, pleased to have on the show today Bill Cassidy. He's a doctor, but he's also our United States Congressman for District 6. Again, Bill, thanks for being with us.
Thank you, Locke.
Let's keep talking about the economy. It's the number one issue for folks because we have 9.5% of the population who's unemployed, and really it's higher than that because some folks are either underemployed or just have given up seeking employment. The economy is, they say, possibly going to do a double dip recession, or at best we have a jobless recovery. So it means we're going to carry 10% of our population is going to be unemployed. Talk to the folks what we can do.
Well, business, I've quickly learned in my first 2 years in Congress, that business wants certainty. If they're going to make a business plan for the next 3 to 4 years, they want to know what the taxes are going to be and what the regulations are going to be. If they're about to do a big expansion and then they get hit with a higher tax or regulations which consume some of their profits, they cannot they cannot make their business plan. So they will just hunker down. Right now, there is uncertainty in both taxes and in the regulatory environment that is inhibiting business from investing.
Well, and as I understand it, come January 1, 2011, taxes are going to go up. Explain that to the folks.
Yeah, and that's a little bit misnomer, if you will. When President Bush came in and we had a recession about 10 years ago, he put in tax cuts for people. So some folks who had previously paid taxes no longer paid taxes. The people at the higher income levels paid less taxes.
Okay.
These are the so-called Bush tax cuts. Now, they said they were only in effect for 10 years. So one of two things will happen in January. Your taxes won't go down. So if they talk about extending the cuts, they don't mean that your taxes go down.
Just stay the way they are.
They either stay the way they are, or if they're allowed to expire, the taxes go up.
For everybody?
It depends. Some would say let the taxes go up for everybody, and others would say let only the taxes go up for those who are higher income. Now, the Republican concern about that is that if you let them go up for small business owners, who are going to be in this higher income folks.
And as I understand it, small business owners produce 60% of the jobs in our economy.
They are the engines of economic growth in our country. If you just look at the statistics.
So if those taxes go up.
If taxes go up, they will have less money to invest in other jobs. There's a fellow running, I think his name is Tim Scott, running for Congress in South Carolina, a Republican, and he says if you make the small business owner pay higher taxes, he cannot hire more people. And it's kind of a nice way of putting it. So that regulatory and tax uncertainty is inhibiting businesses from making the investments that would create more jobs.
So what do you propose?
I think that, one, we've just got to send a signal to businesswomen and businessmen that you're going to have a stable environment for both taxes and for regulation for the next 5 years.
How do you do that?
You say first that EPA, which is, as one example, that the Environmental Protection Agency that wants to regulate carbon dioxide as a pollutant, you are not allowed to do so. Right now, if you think of all the petrochemical plants up and down the Mississippi that hire tremendous numbers of Louisianians, if they're told you're about to be hit with significant regulations and/or taxes related to your carbon dioxide output, which, by the way, as we speak, we're releasing carbon dioxide.
Right.
They're not going to build out their plants, and if they do build a new plant, it's going to be in another country. So it's not that they're not going to produce carbon dioxide. It's just
not going to be here.
Not going to be here. They're
it's
going
in
to
the
employ
world.
people in the Caribbean or in India, and not folks who are living in Louisiana.
So you tell the businesses basically a moratorium on regulations.
Yeah, unless it involves the safety of workers.
And then what do you do with the tax scenario?
The tax scenario is, at least until we're through with this recession, hold taxes as they are.
And do you see that happening?
I think that it depends on how the November elections turn out. If the November elections come up to be a repudiation for the policies that have been put in place the last 2 years, I think it quite likely will. If not, if the Democrats retain control of the House, then I think taxes will go up.
All right, let's talk about the fact that the government has now borrowed so much money, and we were talking about how it's $40,000 per citizen, how that affects the economy, and which means that I guess there's less money out there for folks to borrow, and that affects the economy. Explain it to the folks.
When the stimulus package, the almost $1 trillion stimulus package, was passed by the president and the Democratic leadership of Congress, at that time, the Congressional Budget Office, and the Congressional Budget Office is an independent agency, they looked at it and said, in 10 years, we will have less economic growth as a country because the money that the government borrows is not available for business
Then,
in the future.
the way I look at it, and tell me if I'm wrong, Bill, is in essence what the government did is they said, okay, we're going to take money that we would have spent over the next 10 years, we're going to take it right now and we're going to spend it right now. And we're going to make you pay for it over the next 10 years. They've only spent about, out of the $2 trillion roughly, about what, 25% or a third of it. They haven't spent the rest. And the debt that we're going to have to pay, the interest that we're going to have to pay really negatively affects because it has negative effects.
Absolutely.
This hasn't worked.
You're a small businessman. Ultimately, your profits will be in part spent on taxes to pay down that debt. The more they make you pay, the less you have to hire another worker.
And it boils down to philosophy, doesn't it? In essence, what we're doing is we're saying there's this amount of money, and either the government's going to spend it or the private sector is going to spend it. And the question is, who's going to spend it most efficiently and effectively to produce jobs and a good economy for folks, right?
And that's one way to look at it is who is more likely to spend the money efficiently to create jobs that last long term. We've heard about the bridge to nowhere a few years ago. Mm-hmm. That was a bridge in Alaska that went nowhere. Well, business would never have done that. Business would have said, wait a second, we're going to have a bridge here where we're going to have 100,000 cars pass a day. That's where we build the bridge. I think of how much infrastructure needs we have between on the I-12 between East Baton Rouge and Livingston, or the I-10 between Ascension and East Baton Rouge. Those bridges need to be built out.
And in fact, let's talk about Louisiana and what you've done in terms of getting highway funds for Louisiana and different grants also.
Well, let me compliment the state legislature and the governor, because both entities have attempted to get more money for highways here on the I-12 and the I-10. My office has similarly attempted to do that on a federal level. And we work with the State Department of Transportation to come up with road projects where we can benefit this 10-parish area. Ascension, East Baton Rouge, Livingston, West Baton Rouge, all the parishes, including the Felicianas and St. Helena, tremendous road problems. And so that's going to be a long-term goal. How do we build out that infrastructure so that we have more economic growth here, that we're not chokeholding it by having an inadequate infrastructure system?
I know you've also been working on the erosion problem that we have of our wetlands. Explain to the folks about that.
Well, I tell my staff, if we're so lucky to be representing this district for a number of years, the coastline has to be our issues. Because even though it's technically not in my district, it's in my state, that's all involved with the Mississippi. We need to figure out as a state how to use the Mississippi to rebuild our coastline.
And that's what you're working on
yes.
now. Bill, thank you so much.
Hey,
Appreciate
thank you,
you being on the show again. Look forward to having you again. This is Locke Meredith with Legal Lines. I'm our United States Congressman, Bill Cassidy.